Welcome to White Space, DCD's weekly look at news from the data centre industry. And this week we have a guest, Zahl Limbuwala from Romonet, or I should say the award-winning Romonet. You've just received a prestigious award, I understand, from us.
Yes, so thank you. Yes, we won the 2016 award for innovation in the data centre, Parkville North American Awards. Mm-hmm. So it was very nice. I got to collect it in person in New York a couple of weeks ago.
Right, good. And the innovation in question is Ramonet's technology, which is...
Yes, our cloud-based big data platform. So I'm sure we'll get more opportunity to talk about it. But essentially a cloud platform that we're using to support typically very large data centre owner-operators and get a much better handle on how they operate those facilities from a performance and return on investment perspective.
Okay, let's get to the news. The breaking news, or the most important news as we record this, is Equinix is selling 8 data centres to Digital Realty, which on one level is a bit of a surprise because in some spheres they're competitors, and Equinix is, generally speaking, in expansion mode. But this dates back to a requirement that Equinix had to sell off some data centres in order to make another expansion. That's the acquisition of Telecity. Zahl, any thoughts on the way this is going?
Yeah, I mean, I see this as very much a continuation of the consolidation of data centres globally. We've seen a lot of consolidation in terms of acquisition, expansion. I mean, the colo market in particular really seems to be booming. So I think this is very much a continuation. I know to a large extent Equinix and Digital Realty are seen as competitive. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the roots of where they come from, Equinix has traditionally been more a retail player in terms of co-location, and Digital more an owner, landlord, wholesale provider. And of course those lines have blurred over the years, but I think this is very much part of that consolidation.
That's right. In some places Digital Realty is actually Equinix's landlord, I think in Paris. People have been looking at this from the different viewpoints. I mean, I'd say probably from the viewpoint of the people who are customers within those data centres, this is good news. Since last year, they've known that they're going to have a new landlord, and I would say probably Digital is one of the better landlords to have if you're a customer in a data centre. Don't know if there's anything you'd want to say on how customers will feel about this deal.
Yeah, I mean, well, each customer has their own experience with their providers, but in terms of scale providers, both Equinix and Digital obviously invest significantly in their facilities. I think they both have very good reputations in the market in terms of being able to meet the customer's needs and satisfying what the customers are looking for. So I don't think, really there's necessarily going to be any material change from going from one landlord to another landlord. They're both at the top of their business in terms of both investment into the facilities, how to own and operate facilities like that, and customer service. So.
Yes, no material change is a plus if you're a customer in a data centre, I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean,
you really don't want change.
Unless you've got data centres that are older and need reinvestment. Again, both of those businesses are very competent operators in terms of investment and reinvestment in facilities at the right times, but no change, absolutely.
Yes, I mean, one comment I've had is that some of these data centres are quite full and at a stage where upgrades could be needed, and being part of a big organisation of data centres means there's more scope for sort of shifting resources to different places. So they've got sort of, if people that are in those data centres have probably got a clear visibility of sort of upgrade paths that will happen in future. One other angle to watch on this is what happens to interaction, because part of the origin of the Equinix Telecity deal was that originally Telecity wanted to buy Interaction, but then found it was itself being bought. arguably in order to stop that deal going, to allow Equinix to become a bigger European player. Did I get that right?
Well, what actually happened behind the scenes, what the intents, I think there's lots of speculation on. I mean, it is true that obviously there was a deal to whether it was acquire or merge the two businesses of Interaction and Equinix. I think it just fits with this market, particularly co-location, is one that requires scale to operate at now.
Yeah.
Whether you're a large Japanese provider buying up entities to operate a base at scale with a global footprint, or your Equinix, Interaction, Digital Realty, Telex, it's all about operating at scale. So these various pieces were going to end up somewhere in some sort of consolidation.
Yes, consolidation is the name of the game, and there will be more, we can feel sure.
Yes, and if I can just finish with Equinix, Equinix is not building data centers in Russia. Can I just make that clear? Because apparently last week I published this story which was talking about a reseller deal. So like customers in Russia can now get their Equinix servers all around the world through a local sort of like representative. It's a Russian company and the support is provided in Russian, so a good deal all in all. But apparently some people decided that this means that Equinix is finally coming to Russia and starting to build data centers there, which is not true. Actually, the only sort of Eastern European countries that they have presence in are Poland and I think Bulgaria. So Eastern Europe is at the moment, like it's all open, it's there for the taking.
Right. So if Equinix wasn't previously aware of it, they now know there's a certain demand for it, which is borne out by the fact that if you run a headline that's got Equinix and Russia in it, people will ring up Equinix and ask to book space.
Yes.
Okay.
All in a day's work.
And the the partner they're doing business with there, do we know much about them?
They're a local provider, and the name is the Stag Group. They have two data centers in Moscow, and Moscow is a very competitive market. There's sort of like the last facility, I think, is like state of the art. It's a real modern data center for basically pitched at Western customers. So yeah, these guys, they're sort of like a steady pair of hands, and by the look of things, should be trusted.
Right. And it's booming over there for all the normal reasons, but also
plus data residency.
Data residency,
of course, because you cannot store data of Russian citizens outside of Russia.
You mentioned that data centers get better when they're fuller. They're more efficient when they're fuller as well, and that is better for their use of energy. On a slightly tangential note to that, data centers generally are moving towards using more renewable energy, and we've had two stories on that in the last few days. Firstly, there's a renewable buyers club called the initials are REBA, the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, that's been set up in the States between three environmental business organisations, which is specifically about promoting the use of renewable energy, encouraging, helping companies through the minefield of local regulations. I think a lot of American states have their own laws, and it can be very difficult to source renewable energy. So that's a good idea. We like the idea of that. I don't know if there's anything more to add to it, really.
No, perhaps the Buyers Clubs was sort of like that, sort of like we found out about them a couple of years ago, Dallas Buyers Club, obviously. But yeah, whenever people come together to sort of like to have more purchasing power and actually dictate their terms, that this is what they do. So I'm wondering, these are quite big organizations, what that's going to do to the market, because they could actually drive the price down, and maybe even sort of like have a negative impact on the renewables market.
Well, I'd add to that and say, renewables becoming cheaper is a good thing for everybody in the market, right? At the moment, there is a delta between non-renewable and renewable energy generally. Not everywhere in the world, but in many places in the world, which is why we only have still a small percentage of renewables as contribution, for example, in the UK. I liken this to open compute, right? Which is essentially a big buyers club.
Yes.
And absolutely has forced and is continuing to, I think, positively influence the industry in terms of, if you look at the traditional source of IT equipment in this industry, you know, the IBMs, HPs, Dells of the world, and underneath those Intel predominantly. The disruption in that market towards a much more, let's say, consumer suitable form factor, price, product has been heavily influenced by things like open compute. I think this has the potential to do a similar thing, at least in the US. Obviously, the members of that, as you've got in your story, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, Google, all have a very significant brand profile in the market from a CSR perspective.
Yes.
Right. So, and absolutely, this is much about brand value for them and the perception of their brand in terms of they're very large consumers of energy. Data centers are now very publicly visible entities. And consumers of energy, and all of them have done good things, right? They've all done good things, but they've thus far tended to be quite specific to their own businesses. So these guys coming together, and that'll help standardization in some cases. I think that'll help with not just sourcing renewable energy, but a lot of the technology around renewable energy as well. Because let's just for a second say, well, let's say all of them back some sort of wind power, which increases the demand on efficient, highly efficient, lower cost wind turbines. That again in turn will drive some efficiency into that market. So I think it's a good thing. It would be good to see that happen outside of the US as well, but it's a good start.
Yes, let's have a European energy buyers alliance for renewables.
And I think it's got to include more than just energy in its in the sense that we'll see it in the data center, which is predominantly electrical energy, and we talk about the gigawatts that they consume and so on. I think it's got to be the other sources of essentially natural resource that goes into. Right, one of those is water. These guys build data centers in all sorts of areas, in many cases in arid areas, and in some cases using technologies that reduce their need for electrical energy, electrical power, but may increase the pressure on the local water resources. So again, having visibility to all these things, I think through the whole broader coverage of renewables is a good thing. Romonet just released a capability that allows data center operators to understand the trade-off between three primary things, and anyone that's operating at scale is essentially faced with the trade-off between cost, electrical energy, and in many cases water. And there isn't a perfect data center where you have lowest cost, lowest electrical energy consumption, and lowest water. They're trade-offs. So understanding what you may trade depending on where your data center is, what your constraints are, is an important factor for all of these guys.
Oh, absolutely, on where you are. I mean, there's a suggestion I've seen that so many of the sort of what's normally seen as a given for efficient data centers is based on the northern hemisphere. If you're tropical and somewhere very dry, you might find it's more efficient and cheaper to use a lot of solar panels and run a kind of cooling that would be seen as inefficient to use if you were somewhere where you had an abundant supply of water. The ASHRAE has a standard, it's working on 90.4, which is about the efficiency of data centres. ASHRAE is the Association of Heating, Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Engineers, and their standards are used sometimes in kind of building regulations for various sort of states and countries. 90.4 has been through 3 drafts. There's another draft at the moment, and comments are invited on it, and they're hoping to get it finished by June. If you're listening to this, you can still comment. Yes,
because I mean, these guys are the guys who should comment probably. So,
yes.
So
get to it. I mean, but the interesting thing about this is the history that an earlier draft of this attempted to build PUE into the standard, which, as we were saying earlier, is the level of PUE you can achieve depends to a large extent on where you're building, what the climate is. So they built it in with a series of climate zones where particular PUE would be required to the level that the ASHRAE standard is itself required, which is kind of variable. So, and people didn't like that.
There were riots on the streets.
Well, PUE always evokes a lot of strong feelings in the industry, from pretty much every camp, in every direction. I think, my take on PUE is that you've always got to ask two questions alongside, which is where is the data centre from a climate region perspective, and what is its utilisation at, or at what point is that PUE you're trying to target. If you're saying I'm going to target all of my data centres to have a lower than 1.1 or 1.2 PUE, at what level of utilisation? When it's empty, when it's at 100%, no data centres in theory operating 100%, but those two questions are generally either not asked or not clarified. So I think what ASHRAE is doing in terms of the climate region side of things makes some sense. But again, we do need a better set of indicators and metrics than just PUE in this industry.
Right. Finally, infrastructure masons. They are the builders of the digital infrastructure. It's a new group, I suppose you could say super group of data centre builders. They're Dean Nelson, who was at eBay and sort of spearheaded eBay's data centre programs, is now working with this group, and the idea is for best practices in data centres to be shared amongst the sort of the leading people that are building the digital infrastructure. So there's a little sort of analogy with the masons who built, who came to power, stone masons who built cathedrals in the Middle Ages.
And also ruled the world.
And so, I don't think there's world domination behind this, but the first 50 members of this organisation have between them built $50 billion worth of infrastructure in 50 countries, which are all nice round numbers. And actually, today, as we record this, is I think the first meeting of the infrastructure masons. So we'll hear a little bit more about their work programme, and it'll be interesting to see what they're doing in future. Well, thank you for joining us for this special edition of White Space. We'll see you next week.